Hello. Did you know that in biblical thinking, name equals authority, but name also equals fame? So, by obscuring the name of the Creator, Satan attempts to interfere with the Creator's authority, and Satan attempts to interfere with the Creator's fame. Let me show you. Jews have replaced the name of the Creator with Adonai, and even Hashem, while Christians have replaced the Creator's name with Lord. And how about Pan, Zoti, Her, Uram, Shoda Prabhu in other languages? Can you see the confusion? Do you see the interference? Therefore, in this video series, we will focus on the original Hebrew name of the Creator, Yod-Heh-Waw-Heh. Numerous topics and arguments will be investigated and tested against authentic Hebrew manuscript evidence. Thanks to Justin, my son, who prepared these topics and who will also be presenting these topics. My name is Piet van Rensburg. Please visit us at HebrewGospels.com.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the series on Nehemia Gordon and the pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton Yod-Heh-Waw-Heh. This is session number 8. Today we're dealing with a very important question. Is Nehemia Gordon trustworthy, honest, and a searcher of truth? And to answer this question, we'll be looking at Nehemia's claims about the rhyme of the words Yehovah, Ahava, and Yehovah in John chapter 17. But before we do that, why is this an important question? This is a very important question because we've all heard people say, no, you can't listen to Nehemia Gordon because he doesn't believe in Yeshua. And then on the other hand, we have people who say, well, why won't we listen to Nehemia Gordon? He is honest, he is trustworthy, and he teaches us the truth. So why would we not want to learn some more truth from him? And so people look at Nehemia Gordon's work about the same way they look at the Aleppo Codex. Let's just talk about the Aleppo Codex. The Aleppo Codex is the most accurate single copy of the Masoretic text in existence. And why is it so accurate? Because it was pointed and corrected by Aaron ben Asher. And Aaron ben Asher was a Karaite Jew. And he was very meticulous in what he did, and his manuscript is so accurate that we can learn a lot of truth from the Aleppo Codex. And so people think Nehemia Gordon's work as a Karaite will be as trustworthy as the Aleppo Codex. And so what do you think would happen if you tell people, stop reading the Aleppo Codex? It was written by a Karaite Jew, pointed by a Karaite Jew who rejected Yeshua. People would say, we know that. That's not a secret. And that's not the point. The point is the manuscript is accurate. It is trustworthy. That's the point. And this is how people look at Nehemia's work. Now, the only problem here is that in the previous 4 videos, we contrasted what Nehemia Gordon teaches with the evidence we saw in the Aleppo Codex, and it did not match. And the evidence we saw in the Aleppo Codex is the opposite of what Nehemia Gordon teaches. In fact, in the last 2 videos, I've shown you 8 evidences from this manuscript, from the Aleppo Codex, that prove the vowels Shua Cholom Kametz belong to Adonai, not to the name Yod-Heh-Waw-Heh. So who's right and who's wrong? Who is honest and who is not honest? Who is trustworthy and who is not? And what is the truth of all this? Let's move on to some quotes. Here is a quote by Michael Rood, and he says, Nehemia Gordon is one who has tools in the Hebrew language and in the Greek language that is just far superior to anyone else that I've ever known in my entire life. And I know some smart people. Okay, that sounds like a very good reason for learning from Nehemia Gordon. Let's read further. But Nehemia Gordon brings to the table a revelation from the scripture and a commitment for the truth that I have not seen any place else. Obviously, Michael Rood knows many believers in Yeshua, and he's telling us no one else has such a commitment for the truth as Nehemia Gordon. And if this is true, then we have very good reason to learn from Nehemia Gordon, because no one else, not even the believers in Yeshua, are as committed to the truth. Okay, let's move on to a video from Michael Rood's channel where they tell us how trustworthy and honest Nehemia Gordon is.
And Nehemia Gordon,
And Nehemia's done that.
he
Yes.
is, you put him on the scent of something, and he never gives up.
Right.
He will burn the house down looking for the truth, and that's what I love about him. He's the most honest scholar that I know, that I've ever met in Israel. A very honest scholar, and that's why I trust him.
I agree.
He's earned that trust.
He has. He's a real searcher for truth.
Okay, so here we are told that Nehemia Gordon is the most honest scholar that Michael Rood has ever met in Israel. And he is trustworthy. He's earned his trust. He's a searcher for truth. And if this is an accurate description of Nehemia and his work, then we have every reason to learn from Nehemia Gordon, because we want to know what the truth is, don't we? Okay, now, what I want to show you today is Nehemia's claims about the words Yehovah, Ahava, and Yehovah and their rhyme in John chapter 17. And this is from the series called The Gentiles Shall Know My Name, a very well-known series by Michael Rood and Nehemia Gordon. And the episode is called The Name Discovered in More Than 227 Manuscripts. Now, before we look at Nehemia's claims about John chapter 17, I want to show you in this very episode, recorded the same night, Michael Rood first tells us that Nehemia is so honest.
If you were that kind of person, I wouldn't have come to you. But I knew that you were honest, a
Right.
very honest scholar.
Yeah, so-
But I knew that you were honest, a
Right.
very honest scholar.
Yeah, so
Okay, so Michael Rood says that Nehemia Gordon is honest, he's a very honest scholar, and Nehemia says yes, right, implying that yes, he is a very honest scholar. Okay, so now I'm going to show you a video clip of Nehemia Gordon that is about 5 minutes long. So please pay attention. I want you to notice several things. Nehemia is going to tell us exactly what he claims to have found, exactly where he found it, what chapter in the Bible, what translation. It will be very clear what he's talking about. And I want you to notice that Nehemia Gordon is very excited about what he found. He is committed to what he's teaching. And this is why many people trust him. They say, how could this be wrong? How could this be untrue if Nehemia himself is so excited and committed to what he's doing?
but when you look at it both from the Jewish culture and the language that Yeshua spoken, which was the Hebrew language, in that context, you get all these insights. And one of the places which is really cool, and we were talking about this before, is in John 17. And can we get to John 17?
I think so. Yeah.
That if Jesus wanted Christians or people who follow him to know that name, he would have taught them that name and made it known. Now, can we get to John 17?
Really.
And that's what it says in the Greek. I have made your name known. John 17:26. He ends the speech. I made your name known to them. And we call that in textual studies an inclusio. He opens the speech with the phrase, I made your name known, and he ends it with the same phrase. It's a rhetorical device throughout the Hebrew language where I want to emphasize a point. I start with something and I end with it. What's interesting here, now this is something that would be completely lost in the English. And I'll be honest, Michael, I didn't notice this until I was speaking with a Messianic pastor, and he said, Nehemia, we were spending some time together studying, and he said, would you look at the Hebrew translation of John 17 for me, and I'm like, why would I look at a Hebrew translation of John 17? I know that's not
Comes
the
from the
original.
Greek.
And I know it's from the Greek. It's
Yeah.
by a man named Franz Delitzsch, a great Bible scholar of ancient Hebrew, who translated John 17 into the Hebrew from Greek. I said, well, why would I bother looking at that? He said, just do me a favor. So I start looking at it, and I'm blown away. Completely unexpected. I found something he didn't, I mean, he had no idea what I would find, right? So, but he had a hunch, and I give him credit. He had that hunch. And I look at it, and what I find is, you know, I've talked in the past about Hebrew word puns. And a Hebrew word pun is where they take a certain Hebrew word and they use it repeatedly throughout the passage. And sometimes they'll use two similar sounding words repeatedly after throughout the passage. You'll just punch it. They'll use that word over and over and over. So we have this beautiful thing here in John 17. Can we go back to John 17?
Please do.
Okay.
Please do.
So, and I only saw this when I looked in Franz Delitzsch's Hebrew translation. So this is the beautiful thing he did. He translated it from Greek into Hebrew, and things appeared that you couldn't see in the Greek or the English. So one of the things that showed up is he's talking about your name, and he says, and he has the phrase your name 3 times, your name, your name, your name. Remember, shalem, 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 just like in the parable. 3 times your name. He opens with your name. He closes with your name. I've made your name known. And then throughout he keeps talking about which you have given me. And he keeps saying this, you have given me, you have given me, you gave me, to those whom you gave me, you gave. I mean, it's repeated. In Second Temple Hebrew and in a little bit in First Temple Hebrew, we have another word for gave, which is Yahav, Yehovah. So he's talking 3 times about the name, which is Yehovah, and he keeps using this verb over and over, Yehovah, 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 which sounds like the name Yehovah. And he uses this verb 16 times in 26 verses. This is not a coincidence.
Right,
Even when you read it in English, you're like, why does he keep repeating himself? Because that's the Hebrew style. You want to, punch that key word that has the sound of the point you're trying to get to, which is making the name known. So he says, I've made your name known. Those whom you gave me, you gave me, you gave me, I gave, you gave. And that's Yehovah, Yehovah, Yehavta, Yehavti, Yehavtani. It sounds like the name Yehovah. Well, if that was all, that'd be impressive, but maybe it's a coincidence. 5 times he talks about love, which is Ahava. So you'll have Yehovah, the name, Yehovah to give, and Ahava to love. That's 3 words that sound very similar in the Hebrew language. There's no way that he gives this speech and that's not just jumping off his lips to their ears, that he's punching this concept of those who you've given me, love, and the name of the Father, Yehovah. Hebrew word puns. This is a central theme throughout this passage of John 17. And the bottom line is, what ties all of this together is that Yeshua says, I made your name known. So he's telling his disciples, if you take this at face value, the name of my Father is Yehovah. That's the face value of what it says, if you take it seriously. Okay. So he's telling his disciples, if you take this at face value, the name of my Father is Yehovah. That's the face value of what it says, if you take it seriously.
Okay.
Wow, this sounds very, very impressive. Nehemia says the face value of this passage, of this chapter, is that Yeshua is saying the name of his Father is Yehovah. Okay. So, I hope you noticed that Nehemia Gordon is very excited and very committed to what he's teaching. And he told us exactly what he found and where he found. He says he found this in John chapter 17 in the Franz Delitzsch translation. So what I want us to do is to go to the Franz Delitzsch translation, to John chapter 17, and read it. And then we're going to count together. Is Nehemiah's claim accurate? Does the word Yehovah occur 16 times and the word Ahava occur 5 times in that chapter? Yes or no? But before we do that, we just need to talk about 2 other things first. So, you might have heard Nehemiah say here, things appeared that you couldn't see in the Greek or the English. Now, some people might think this is a bit far-fetched. But let's just look at an example. This actually happens in the Franz Delitzsch translation. So here is a good example from Matthew 1:21. This is the messenger or the angel saying, "Wakarata et shemo Yeshua," and you must call his name Yeshua, and then it gives the reason. Why? For, because, hu Yoshia, he will save, et amo mechatotehem, his people from their sins. So the answer to why his name is Yeshua is this word here, Yoshia. Now, if you read this in English, you must call his name Jesus, for he will save. Then you think, what has Jesus got to do with save? You can't see the connection. And the same thing happens in Greek and in Aramaic. The word Yeshua doesn't rhyme with the Greek or the Aramaic word for save. But here in Hebrew, in the France Delitzsch translation, the original meaning or rhyme reappears. And we see an internal rhyme between the word Yeshua, the name Yeshua, and the word Yoshia. They're from the same root, Yod Shin Ayin, which means to save. And so in Hebrew this makes sense. And this is something that reappears in the France Delitzsch translation. So this doesn't prove, by the way, that the France Delitzsch translation is the original Hebrew, but this definitely seems to prove or show that when Matthew wrote originally it would have been Hebrew, otherwise this would have made no sense. Okay, now the second thing we want to talk about is the difference between internal rhyme and vowel rhyme. So on the screen we have an example of internal rhyme where the consonants rhyme, but the vowels do not really rhyme. We cannot take this word here, Yoshia, and say, well, the reason for calling him Yod Shin Waw Ayin, let's say we don't know what the vowels is Yoshia, and so we take the vowels here and put it on there, and Yeshua's true name is Yoshia. Doesn't work that way. This is not a vowel rhyme. This is just the root letters that rhyme. So if we want to prove anything about the vowels, the true vowels of the Creator's name, we will have to look at vowel rhyme. And that's why these three words that Nehemia talks about will work so well. Yehovah, Ahava, Yehovah. They end in the same vowel, ah. So in Hebrew, vowel rhyme is normally the last syllable, and especially the accented syllable that rhymes. Let's look at some examples here. This is the Aleppo Codex, Psalm 122. Sha'alu shalom Yerushalayim yishlayu ohavayik. So Yerushalayim rhymes with ohavayik in vowels, not in consonants. The lamed and the mem doesn't rhyme with the beit yod and kaf there. It doesn't. But the vowels rhyme. So this is a different kind of rhyme, and this is what we're concerned with in John chapter 17, if we want to prove what the true vowels of the Creator's name are. One more example here, Adabarana Shalom Bach, and further on, Avaksha Tovlach. So this is actually quite exceptional that we, or quite special that we have two vowels rhyming, or ah. Normally it's the last vowel or the accented vowel. Okay, so let's just make sure we understand. We're not really concerned with internal rhyme in John chapter 17 because we're concerned with the vowels of the Creator's name. We know what the consonants are. We're concerned with vowel rhyme. And Yehovah, Ahava, and Yehovah, those three words rhyme in vowels in the accented syllable, ah, at the end of the word, ending with kametz hey. Okay, so now that we understand all of this, let's read this France Delitzsch translation in Hebrew. I'm going to read this to you out loud in Hebrew. I'll use basically modern Hebrew pronunciation to keep it simple because, by the way, Yehovah, Ahava, Yehovah, that's modern Hebrew pronunciation. And every time you hear the word Yehovah or Ahava, put up your hand and we're going to count together how many times do these two Hebrew words actually occur. Does Yehovah occur 16 times? Does Ahava occur 5 times in this chapter? Yes or no? So I'll read this out loud, and so you need to listen for Yehovah and Ahava. And I'll show you with the arrow what line I'm reading. את אלה דיבר ישוע, וישא עיניו השמיימה, ויאמר, אבי, הנה באה השעה פאר את בנך, למען יפארך גם בניך. כאשר נתת לו השולטן על כל בשר, למען ייתן חיי עולם לכל אשר נתת לו. ואלה הם חיי העולם, לדעת אותך כי אתה האלוהים לבדך, ואת ישוע המשיח אשר שלחת. אני פארתיך בארץ, כיליתי מלאכתך אשר ציוויתני לעשות. ואתה, פארני אתה אבי אמך, בכבוד אשר היה לי אמך טרם היות העולם. את שמך הודעתי לבני האדם. So here we have the phrase, your name I made known to the sons of man. So now listen carefully. Listen for the words Yehovah and Ahava. And stop me every time you hear one of those words. את שמך הודעתי לבני האדם אשר נתת לי מתוך העולם, לך היו ולי נתת אותם, ואת דברך נצרו. ואתה ידעו כי כל אשר נתת לי מאמך הוא. כי הדברים אשר נתת לי נתתי להם, והם קיבלום, ויכירו באמת כי מאמך יצאתי, ויאמינו כי אתה שלחתני. אני באדם עתיר לך, לא בעד העולם עתיר, כי אם בעד אלה אשר נתת לי, כי לך המה. וכל אשר לי לך הוא, ושלך שלי, ונתפארתי בהם. ואני אינני עוד בעולם, והם בעולם המה, ואני בא אליך. אבי הקדוש, נצור אותם בשמך, את אשר נתת לי, למען יהיו אחד כמונו. בהיותי עמהם בעולם, אני נצרתי אותם בשמך. את אשר נתתם לי שמרתי, ולא עבד מהם איש, זולתי בן האבדון, למלות דבר הכתוב. ועתה הנני בא אליך, ואת אלה אני מדבר בעולם, למען תמלא להם שמחתי בקרבם. אני נתתי להם את דברך, והעולם שנא אותם, יען כי לא מן העולם הם, כאשר גם אנוכי לא מן העולם אני. Let's just pause here. How many times have you heard the word Yehovah so far? Put up your hands. 0. Didn't hear it? Okay, we haven't read that yet. How many times did you hear the word Ahava so far? Didn't hear it at all? No one? Okay, we haven't read that word so far. We're halfway through the chapter. But don't panic, don't worry. Nehemia's trustworthy. And he said it's in here 16 times. Yehovah occurs 16 times. And Ahava 5 times. So let's just keep reading and keep counting and see what we find. לא אתיר לך אשר תיקחם מן העולם, רק שתצרם מן הרע. לא מן העולם הם, כאשר גם אנוכי אינני מן העולם. קדש אותם באמיתך, דברך אמת. כאשר אתה שלחת אותי אל העולם, כן גם אני שלחתי אותם אל העולם. ואני מקדיש את נפשי באדם, למען יהיו גם הם מקודשים באמת. אולם לא לבד בעד אלה אנוכי מתיר לך, כי אם גם בעד המאמינים בי על פי דברם, למען יהיו כולם אחד, כאשר אתה אבי, בי אתה ואני בך, והיו גם המה בנו כאחד, למען יאמין העולם, כי אתה שלחתני. ואני נתתי להם את הכבוד אשר נתת לי, למען יהיו אחד, כאשר אנחנו אחד נחנו. אני והם ואתה אבי, למען יהיו מושלמים לאחד, ולמען ידע העולם, כי אתה שלחתני. ואהבת אותם כאשר אהבתני. אבי אשר נתתם לי, רצוני שיהיו עמדי באשר אהיה אני, למען יחזו בכבודי אשר נתת לי, כי אהבתני לפני מוסדות עולם. אבי הצדיק, הן העולם לא ידעך, ואני ידעתיך, ואלה הכירו אשר אתה שלחתני. ואני הודעתים את שמך, ואוסיף להודיעם, למען תהיה בם האהבה. So there we have the word אהבה, האהבה אשר אהבתני, וגם אני אהיה בהם. But this is the end of the chapter. This is the last verse of chapter 17. There you can see Yod Het, that's chapter 18. ויהי ככלות ישוע לדבר את הדברים האלה. And it came to pass when Yeshua finished speaking these words, so that's where chapter 18 starts. So how many times did you hear the word Ahava in this chapter? Once. Only once? And how many times do you hear the word Yehovah in this chapter? Not at all? Didn't hear it? Well, it's not here once. Ahava is here once, but Yehovah is not here even once. It's here 0 times in the France Delitzsch translation. So, what's going on here? Let's just go back to Nehemia's video and make sure what he said. Let's just make sure that he actually said it occurs 16 times in this chapter, the word Yehovah.
Yahav, Yahavah. So he's talking 3 times about the name, which is Yehovah, and he keeps using this verb over and over, Yahavah, 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 which sounds like the name Yehovah. Mm-hmm. And he uses this verb 16 times in 26 verses. This is not a coincidence.
Right.
Okay, so that's what Nehemia says. He says, he, referring to Yeshua, uses this verb over and over, Yahavah, Yahavah, Yahavah. Nehemia says Yeshua used this verb 16 times in 26 verses. Well, we've just read John chapter 17. We've read these 26 verses, and Yahavah is not here once. So yes, 16 times Yeshua talks about giving, but let's look at some of these verbs. Natata, you gave. Yitain, he may give. Netatam, you gave them. Every time in this chapter we see something about giving, it's not Yehovah, it's from the root Natan. And then how about Ahava? Yes, we have 5 places here where it talks about love, but only one of them is Ahava. So let's read these other words. Ahavta, Avtani, Avtani, Avtani. Does that rhyme with Yehovah? No, it doesn't. Not in vowels. Remember, we're concerned with vowel rhyme. This word here, Ahava, is the only one of the 21 words that supposedly rhyme with Yehovah that we actually found here. We're supposed to see 21 words here that rhyme in vowels with the pronunciation Yehovah. Well, I only see one, and it's the normal Hebrew word for love. And the problem is, because it occurs only once, there's nothing for it to rhyme with. Have we got the right translation? Let's just make sure we've got the right translation here. Go back to Nehemia's video. He's going to tell us exactly in what translation he says he found this.
Yeah, and I know it's from the Greek. It's by a man named Franz Delitzsch, a great Bible scholar of ancient Hebrew, who translated John 17 into the Hebrew. So we have this beautiful thing here in John 17. Can we go back to John 17?
Please do.
Okay.
Please do.
So, and I only saw this when I looked in Franz Delitzsch's Hebrew translation. So this is the beautiful thing he did. He translated it from Greek into Hebrew, and things appeared that you couldn't see in the Greek or the English.
So, we've got the right translation here. Nehemia says it's by a man named Franz Delitzsch, who translated it from Greek into Hebrew. He says, I only saw this when I looked in the Franz Delitzsch translation. So he tells us twice what translation he's using. This is the Franz Delitzsch translation. Nehemia Gordon says Yehovah occurs in this chapter 16 times. We've just read it, and it occurs 0 times. 0 times. Let's look at an older edition, 1877. And again, yes, we have many times we have the verb to give, but is it Yehovah? There you can see natata, yitain, natati, and so on. It's never Yehovah. And again, Ahava occurs only once. How about a new edition? Here's a very new edition, 2002. And again, Yehovah doesn't occur once. Now, like I told you, if you just know the Hebrew alphabet, you can see this for yourself. Let's zoom in on these words. In this chapter, we have 4 different inflections from the root Natan used for give. So 16 times we have the root Natan, and it's in these 4 inflected forms. So now if you know the Hebrew alphabet, let's look at the word in the top left corner. Can you see there's a nun There's a tau or tav and another tau. Does that look like Yehovah to you? Can you see? This is not Yehovah, it's Natata. How about the next one? There you can see a yod, a tau, and a final nun or nun sofit. Does that look like Yehovah? No, doesn't look like Yehovah. The next one, nun, tau, tau, final mem. Does that look like Yehovah? No. The next one, nun, tau, tau, yod. Does that look like Yehovah? Not at all. Okay. So there's no way you can tell me that when Nehemia read this, he thought he was reading Yehovah. He can read Hebrew. He says he learned to read Hebrew in kindergarten. There's no way you can tell me that when Nehemia read this, he thought he was reading Yehovah. What do you think? So, what's going on here? What do we call this in English? When a person tells you something that he or she knows is incorrect as a fact, as if it's a fact. What do we call this in English? Let's look at the dictionary definition. A lie, as a noun, is a statement made by somebody knowing that it is not true. Okay, let's just go back to the slide. Does Nehemia Gordon know that Yehovah occurs 0 times in this chapter? What do you think? If he ever read this chapter, he would have seen natata, yite, netatam, natati. He would have been able to see that Yehovah occurs 0 times. Yet he tells us with great excitement and enthusiasm that Yehovah occurs 16 times. Let's read further here. A barefaced or bold-faced or blatant lie is a lie that is deliberate and shocking. So I don't know about you, but I find this kind of shocking that Nehemia Gordon sits there and tells us with great excitement that Yehovah occurs 16 times in John chapter 17, but when we go and check, we see it occurs 0 times in John chapter 17. The first time I watched this video of Nehemia Gordon about John chapter 17, I had already found many technical mistakes in Nehemia's arguments about the Creator's name, and we've covered many of these in the previous sessions. But I still thought that Nehemia Gordon was trustworthy, so that if he told me that John chapter 17 in the France Danish translation uses a particular Hebrew word over and over, that I would be able to go to that chapter in the France Danish Bible and find it. So after I watched the video, I went to my Bible and I had a hard copy of the France Danish Bible. It's very well known and widely used. And I read John chapter 17 looking for the word Yehovah. I could not find it once. So I read it a second time. Well, I couldn't find Yehovah in there once. So I went to the computer and I looked at all the different editions, and I even looked at different translations, and I could not find Yehovah in John chapter 17 once. I found this pretty shocking. Now, here's a video of Michael Rood selling Nehemia's book in contrast to all the other people he says making bold-faced lies.
We have listened to and seen so many representations on the internet, on YouTube, of people just making bald-faced lies as statements, in fact, who know nothing about what they're talking about, but yet are pulling people down a path.
Okay, so this is true. There are many people out there trying to teach us about the Creator's name, and they can't even read Hebrew. I've read articles by people saying the Creator's name is this or that, and then you realize they don't even know the difference between the hif-il and the haf-al conjugations in Hebrew. Now, with Nehemia Gordon, it's very different, because he knows Hebrew, and he's a Hebrew speaker, and he, of course, he knows the Hebrew alphabet. So if he tells us Yehovah occurs 16 times in this chapter, whereas it occurs 0 times, do you really think it's a mistake? Do you really think that Nehemia Gordon can look at these words and think he's reading Yehovah, Yehovah, Yehovah? Is that possible? You think it is even possible that Nehemia could have done this by mistake? And if not, it means it's deliberate. Now, remember, in this very same episode, not the same series, not only the same series, the same episode, we are told that Nehemia Gordon is honest. He's an honest scholar.
If you were that kind of person, I wouldn't have come to you. But I knew that you were honest, a very honest scholar.
Yeah,
but I knew that you were honest, a very honest scholar.
Yeah,
So how honest is Nehemia Gordon? Michael Rood told us in this very episode, Nehemia Gordon is a very honest scholar. I think we've seen today how honest Nehemia Gordon really is. Here you can see some screenshots taken from this 5-minute video clip that I showed you earlier. This is how excited Nehemia Gordon is to teach us about something that does not even exist at all. Nehemia says, I was blown away. He says he was blown away with what he found in John chapter 17. This is how blown away Nehemia Gordon is with something that does not even exist. And Nehemia is committed to what he's teaching. He's enthusiastic. This is how enthusiastic Nehemia is about things that do not exist. Can we trust such a person? Can we call such a person honest? Can we really do so? And I'm sure some of you are very upset with me because I've shown you that what Nehemia says doesn't exist in John chapter 17. Well, you know those other people who say, no, we don't watch Nehemia's videos at all because he doesn't believe in Yeshua? You know what? They won't even be surprised. They've read their Bibles. It says here in 1 John 2 verse 22, who is the liar but he who denies that Yeshua is the Messiah? So those people say, if a person rejects Yeshua as the Messiah, who else is a liar? We won't be surprised. Why do most people not believe what's actually written here in the New Testament? You know why? Because they try to think about this logically. And they think, is John really trying to tell us here that every non-Messianic Jew is a liar, deceiver, and an antichrist? Is that really the meaning of 1 John chapter 2? I don't think so. Let's get some perspective from Yeshua. I do not think that every non-Messianic Jew is an outright liar and deceiver. You know why most Jews reject Yeshua as being the Messiah? It's because, unfortunately, Christianity has misrepresented Yeshua to the Jews to the extent that they think Jesus is an anti-Semitist who came to destroy the law and the prophets, to stop circumcision, to change Sabbath to Sunday, and to start a new religion. And that is just not true. But if that were true, then the Jews would have done a very good job to reject Yeshua because he would have been a false prophet. Now the difference is Nehemia Gordon knows what Yeshua taught. Let's just read this verse. Yeshua says, if I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have had sin. But now they have no excuse for their sin. There is a very big difference between people who know what Yeshua spoke and people who don't know what Yeshua spoke. And then when they start reading the New Testament and they read the Gospels and they see what Yeshua spoke, then they learn who Yeshua really is, and then they make their choice. Then it's time to make a choice. Nehemia Gordon has studied the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew and the Greek Gospel of Matthew. He studied the Gospels and other passages in the New Testament. He knows what Yeshua spoke. He knows Yeshua did not come to destroy the law of the prophets. He knows Yeshua did not change Sabbath to Sunday. He understands who Yeshua is. Yeshua says such a person has no excuse for rejecting him. No excuse. Is Nehemia really searching for truth? Yeshua said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. You know what Nehemia often prays to the Father? And he says the Father's name Yehovah, and then he prays to Yehovah the Father, and he ignores Yeshua as being the mediator and the way to the Father. Do you think that's going to work? Is Nehemia really searching for truth? Then he needs to come to Yeshua, because Yeshua is the truth. Yeshua is the truth. He is the life. He is the way. And there's no other way to get to the Father, only through Yeshua the Messiah. Okay, so we are now finished with the logical side of this argument. We have seen that Nehemia Gordon clearly teaches that in the Franz Delitzsch translation, in John chapter 17, Yeshua used the word Yehovah 16 times. We've seen it occurs there 0 times, and any one of you knowing the Hebrew Aleph Bet can check this and see for yourself. The Franz Delitzsch translation is all over the internet. You can get electronic versions and scans and photocopies everywhere. Get your own copy and read John chapter 17 and see for yourself how many times the word Yehovah occurs. It occurs 0 times. Okay, so we finished with that argument. Now we're getting into the technical side of the argument, because some people are going to say, okay, we see it's not in the Franz Delitzsch translation, but we still believe that when Yeshua originally spoke this, he used Yehovah 16 times. So now I want to show you how impossible this is. You know why Franz Delitzsch used the root Natan 16 times, and he never used this root Yahav in John chapter 17? I'm going to explain this now to you, because he knew as a Hebrew scholar that if he used this root Yahav instead of Natan, it wouldn't really be Hebrew, it would be gibberish. Now I'm going to explain this to you. You can see here on the screen a graph of every occurrence of the root Yahav in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew portions of the Tanakh. It's used differently in Aramaic, and we'll get to that later. And every different color here represents a different inflection of this root. Let's just zoom in. At the bottom, it shows the different inflections. Let's zoom in on those and read them out loud. Havu, Hava, Hava, Hav, Hevu, Havi. Now, if you know Hebrew and you look at these verbs here, you'll see that each of these is an imperative. Throughout the entire Tanakh, this Hebrew verb, Yahav, is never used as a normal verb. It's only used as an imperative. Now, what's an imperative? Let's get a good example here. So, it's used, let's say Jacob says to Laban, give me my wife. He uses the root Yahav as an imperative. Give me my wife. But it's never used for I gave, you gave, he will give, he may give. It's never used that way, and that's what we have in John chapter 17. Okay, so let's look at an English example of a phrase that's only used as an imperative, and that's the English phrase, come on. It's only used as an imperative in English. I cannot say in English, yesterday I come on into the house, and the day before we all come on to the city and we bought some groceries, and then we come on back home. We don't use it this way in English. That's not good English. Now the Hebrew word Yahav is used in the exact same way. Let's look at an example here from Genesis 11. وَيُمَرُوا إِيشَ لَرَيْئَيْهُ. Then they said unto each other, Hava, come on, nil bana levenim. So that word Hava is from the root Yahav, and it's an imperative, and it means come on. Come on, let's make bricks. وَنِسْرَفَا لِسْرَيْفَا, and burn them well. وَيُمَرُوا. Then they said, Hava, nivne lanu ir. Come on, let's build ourselves a city. So this is obviously the Tower of Babel, talks about in Genesis 11. And then the funny thing is, Vayomer Yehovah, then Yehovah said, Hava, nerda v'navla sham sfatam. Come on, let's go down and confuse their language there. So this is how this Hebrew word is used. It's used to say, give me that, or it's used to say, come on. But it is never used to say, I gave, you will give, he may give. It's never used that way, neither in First Temple Hebrew or Second Temple Hebrew, based on the Tanakh and the Mishnah. Now, let's just ignore all the evidence. We've seen that if we use this root in John chapter 17, it will be gibberish, it won't be Hebrew. But let's do it anyway. Let's put this root into John chapter 17 anyway, and see what we get. So Hebrew is obviously a different language than English. In Hebrew you have a root word. There's the root natan, and then if you want to say, it means to give. And if you want to say you gave, in English that's two words, but in Hebrew it's one word. So you change the root according to certain rules and you get natata, and that means you gave. And netatam means you gave them. One word in Hebrew. Natati, I gave. Yitain, he may give, or he will give. Now we can take the root yahav and we can change it into the exact same inflected forms, or words that will have the same parsing as the ones you see on the right hand side. And we can imagine what it would have sounded like if these words existed in Hebrew. So take note, they don't exist in First or Second Temple Hebrew, but based on the rules of the Hebrew language we can work out what they would have sounded like and what they would have looked like. So instead of natata, if you use the root yahav, it will be yahavta. Instead of netatam, it will be yehavtam. Instead of natati, it will be yahavti. Instead of yitain, it will be yehav. Okay? Now keep in mind, these words don't exist in First or Second Temple Hebrew. If we do put these words into John chapter 17 in a Hebrew translation, it would be gibberish. It would be like using the English word come on out of context. And still, let's read these words. Do these words rhyme with the pronunciation Yehovah? And do these words sound like Yahavah? Yahavta, Yehavtam, Yahavti, Yehav. Can you see that even if we force this root into John chapter 17 where it doesn't belong at all, and we make a gibberish chapter there, as if Yeshua couldn't speak Hebrew properly, we still don't get the form Yahavah. Here is a video, a short clip of Nehemia Gordon where you can hear him saying some of these inflected forms we just looked at.
So he says, I've made your name known. Those whom you gave me, you gave me, you gave me, I gave, you gave. And that's Yahavah, Yahavah, Yahavta, Yahavti, Yahavtani. It sounds like the name Yehovah.
So keep in mind, those words Nehemia has just said do not exist in the France Daily translation at all. Okay? But we can make up what they would have sounded like, but these verbs Nehemia just said don't exist in the Hebrew language, in First or Second Temple Hebrew. So it's actually, it's dumb to say that that's what Yeshua would have said originally. Not only is it not in the France Daily translation, but it's also impossible that Yeshua would have used the root, and even if he did, it wouldn't make the form Yahavah. So what is Yahavah? What is it? Let's look in a dictionary here. Yehovah is an Aramaic noun. So most of the time Nehemia says Yehovah, but once or twice he says Yehovah. So let's look at both Yehovah and Yehovah in this dictionary. They don't exist in First or Second Temple Hebrew, but they do exist in Aramaic as nouns. So this is Jastro's dictionary. It has Hebrew and Aramaic words in it. And here you can see Yehovah, masculine. The M stands for masculine. That tells you it's a noun. It's a masculine noun. And the Hebrew equivalent is Yehav. So this is not a Hebrew word. It's an Aramaic word. It means that which is put on, bundle, or load. It doesn't mean I gave or you gave me. It's an Aramaic noun meaning load. And the next entry, you can see Yehavit and Yahavat. And then it says F for feminine construct. So it's a feminine noun, and Yahavat is the construct state. Now, without getting into the details here, if it's Yahavat in the construct state, the absolute form is Yahavah. Is this a Hebrew or Aramaic word? Let's see. And by the way, it means giving, share, or dispensation. It's a noun. It's not a verb. It doesn't mean I gave or you gave. It's a noun, and then it gives the Hebrew equivalent, matan sachar, and the Hebrew equivalent, manat. So this is an Aramaic noun. So it's really dumb to think that Yeshua would have used an Aramaic noun 16 times as if it were a Hebrew verb. It's very dumb. It's impossible. Okay, now we've seen that these words do actually exist in Aramaic. They don't exist in First or Second Temple Hebrew, but they do exist in Aramaic as nouns. So Aramaic is a different language, and in Aramaic the root Yod He Bet is used in the perfect, unlike Hebrew. So just to make sure that there's no way that Yeshua would have said Yehovah, we're going to look at the Peshitta New Testament, the Aramaic New Testament. But before we do so, I just want to show you Nehemia is not talking about the Peshitta. He does not believe that the Peshitta is the original. He does not believe that they spoke Aramaic. He doesn't believe that Yeshua spoke Aramaic in John chapter 17.
But when you look at it both from the Jewish culture and the language that Yeshua spoke in, which was the Hebrew language, in that context, you get all these insights. And one of the places which is really cool, and we were talking about this before, is in John 17. And can we get to John 17?
Okay, so as you can see here, Nehemia is not talking about Aramaic. He's not talking about the Peshitta. Nevertheless, we're going to look at the Peshitta and look at every occurrence of the word give, and no matter what the root is here, in John chapter 17, and see whether Yehovah occurs in the Peshitta or not. So there you can see the first one, deyavd. Deyavd means which you gave. The dalet is the which. The yod, he, and beit are the root letters. So as you can see, Yahav, in Aramaic they actually say Yahav. This root is used in Aramaic as a normal verb. However, does the Yavd sound like Yehovah? No, it doesn't. Does the Yavd rhyme with Yehovah? No. Okay, so the rhyme doesn't work. Let's keep reading. There's Deyavd, there's Netel, and this word is obviously from a different root, but still, Netel doesn't rhyme with Yehovah. Deyavd, Deyavd. Then we have Yavd without the dalet prefix. Deyavd, Deyavd, and then we have Yebet. Yebet means I gave. Does Yebet rhyme with Yehovah? Does Yebet sound like Yahavah? No. So even though in Aramaic they use this root Yod Ebet, the form Yehovah is not in this chapter because it's a noun, and Yeshua is using verbs here, saying I gave, you gave, he may give, and so on. Let's keep reading through this chapter and look at every occurrence of the word give, deyavd, 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 yebet, deyavd, yebet, deyavd, deyavd. So that's every occurrence of the word, of the root Yahav in the Peshitta, in John chapter 17, and it never rhymes with Yehovah. So by the way, this is obviously a transcription of the Peshitta from Syriac characters into the block letters, so that you can all follow along easily and see for yourself. Yehovah doesn't occur here, not even the Peshitta. It would be silly to try to put Yehovah into this chapter, even in Aramaic, let alone Hebrew. Now, let's contrast everything we've seen today with what we're being told by Michael Rood and all these other people who say Nehemia is so trustworthy and so honest.
And Nehemia Gordon,
And Nehemia's done that.
he
Yes.
is, you put him on the scent of something, and he never gives up.
Right.
He will burn the house down looking for the truth. And that's what I love about him. He's the most honest scholar that I know, that I've ever met in Israel, a very honest scholar, and that's why I trust him.
I agree.
He's earned that trust.
He has. He's a real searcher for truth.
Well, I'm afraid what we've seen today is just about the opposite of what we're being told by Michael Rood. We've seen today how that Nehemia tells us and teaches us about things that do not exist. Now, I've already found it kind of difficult to believe that Nehemia Gordon is so honest and trustworthy when I studied these other topics. And we covered these topics in the first 7 sessions. We saw in session number 1 that Nehemia Gordon reads and writes Hebrew in the wrong direction. Now, tell me, do English speakers read and write English in the wrong direction by accident? No. So if you see an English phrase written by an English speaker written in the wrong direction, you know it's purposeful. Now how about Hebrew? Nehemia is a Hebrew speaker. Okay, he's also studied Hebrew. How could he read and write Hebrew in the wrong direction by accident? How is that possible? Nehemia says he discovered the name on 9/11/2001. We covered that in session number 2. Nehemia says it's factually untrue that Adonai's vowels were placed on the name. I've shown you in session number 3 it's factually true that Adonai's vowels were placed on the name. Nehemia says it's utter nonsense that the scribes would have changed the composite Shua of Adonai into a simple Shua when they wrote it on the name. In session number 4, I've shown you actual manuscript evidence that prove the scribes did make this change, not only with Adonai's vowels, they also did this with Elohim's vowels. Nehemia says the scribes left out the cholim to hide the true pronunciation of the name. Well, we've seen that's not accurate in the Aleppo Codex nor in the other good Bible manuscripts. Nehemia says in the B52 bomber, the very prepositions prove the name is Yehovah. We've seen that the very prepositions prove Adonai's vowels were placed on the name in the B52 bomber and in the other good Bible Hebrew Bible manuscripts. Nehemia says that in the B52 bomber, the Rafeh on the Hey proves the name is Yehovah and that those vowels don't belong to Adonai. Well, I've shown you in session number 7 that in the B52 bomber we also find the Rafeh on the Hey of Yehovah. What is Yehovah? That's the name with Elohim's vowels. That Rafeh does not prove that we've got the true vowels on the name. So I find it very difficult to fully trust Nehemia Gordon. But like I said, I still thought if he told me John chapter 17 uses this particular word in this particular translation, that would at least be correct. Well, today we've seen that Nehemia Gordon says he saw in the France Danish translation that Yehovah occurs 16 times in John chapter 17. However, it really occurs 0 times in John chapter 17.
So he's talking 3 times about the name, which is Yehovah, and he keeps using this verb over and over, Yehovah, 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 which sounds like the name Yehovah. Mm-hmm. And he uses this verb 16 times in 26 verses. This is not a coincidence.
Right.
However, it really occurs 0 times in John chapter 17. Besides, Yahav, the root, is only used as an imperative in 1st and 2nd Temple Hebrew based on the Tanakh and the Mishnah. So it doesn't belong in John chapter 17 at all. If you force this root into John chapter 17, it won't make the pronunciation Yahavah. We get forms like Yahavti and Yehav. We don't get Yahavah when we force this root into John chapter 17. And like I said, if we do so, if we force this into John chapter 17, it's gibberish anyway. Yehovah doesn't exist in 1st or 2nd Temple Hebrew. It's an Aramaic noun. It is really dumb to think that Yeshua would have used an Aramaic noun 16 times in one chapter as if it were a Hebrew verb. It's really impossible. Okay? We also saw that even in the Aramaic New Testament, even though they use the root yod, hey, beit as a normal verb, the form Yehovah does not occur. We have forms like deyavt and yebet. Doesn't rhyme at all with Yehovah. So not only does it not exist in the France Delitzsch translation, but it is very dumb to say that this is what Yeshua would have used. So what is this? Is this ignorance, or is this a bold-faced lie?
We have listened to and seen so many representations on the internet, on YouTube, of people just making bald-faced lies as statements, in fact, who know nothing about what they're talking about, but yet are pulling people down a path.
So, is this ignorance, or is this a bold-faced lie? Remember the dictionary definition of a bold-faced lie? Does Nehemia Gordon know that Yehovah occurs 0 times in this chapter? What do you think? If he ever read this chapter, he would have seen natata, yite, netatam, natati. He would have been able to see that Yehovah occurs 0 times. Yet he tells us with great excitement and enthusiasm that Yehovah occurs 16 times. Is this ignorance, or is this a bold-faced lie? What is the problem? Okay, I hope you found this interesting. In the next session, session number 9, we want to talk about the 10 rabbis, Kabbalism, and the origin of the vowel points. Do the 10 rabbis really prove that the name is Yehovah? Yes or no? Until then, Shalom in Yeshua Mashiach.